All right. Welcome, everybody. At first, something procedural. The lecture will be about 40 minutes in length, and during lecture time, please keep your microphones muted. The lecture will be followed by 10 to 15 minutes of discussion time, and please use the raise hand function if you would like to ask a question. Please note that this lecture is being video recorded. Attendees will not appear on video unless during discussion time you unmute yourself and ask a question. Alternatively, you may also type your question into the chat so you can remain anonymous for the purpose of the video recording. So now I would like to introduce our speaker. Professor Birger Petersen studied music theory, composition, musicology, theology, and philosophy in Lübeck and Kiel, where he received a doctorate in 2001. He held various teaching positions in northern Germany and worked as a church musician in Eutin, Holstein. In 2008, he was appointed as professor of music theory in Rostock, and in 2011, he was appointed to a university professorship in music theory in Mainz. I'm sorry, I just clicked on something. Back to the introduction. In 2017, followed his habilitation in musicology. Birger Petersen was pro-rector in 2014 and rector, which is equivalent of being the president of the Music Conservatory in Mainz from 2015 to 2017. In the academic year 2017-2018, he conducted research as a senior fellow at the Alfred Krupp Wissenschaftskolleg Greifswald. He received numerous composition prizes, such as the European Culture Prize. And in 2021, he received the Academy Prize of the State of Rhineland-Palatinate, in German Rhineland-Pfalz, for special achievements in research and teaching. Birger Petersen has been co-editor of the church music periodical Forum Kirchenmusik since 2014 and was vice president of the Society for Music Theory from the German Society for Music Theory from 2014 to 2016. The focus of his work is on the history of music theory, especially the 17th and 18th centuries, and on the teaching of new music. He has also published on organ music of the 19th and 20th centuries and on Theodor Adorno's music philosophy. His research focuses on the German-French cultural transfer in the 18th century and the acquisition of historical compositional techniques in theory and compositional practice in the 19th century. Today, we welcome Professor Petersen to speak about Neapolitan Partimento culture and its legacy in the 19th century. We specifically asked Professor Petersen to make this topic accessible to anyone without any prior knowledge to the Partimento culture. So welcome, Professor Petersen.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Nico. Thank you for your warm introduction and for the invitation to Texas. I'm a bit sad not to be in Texas in person, but it's great to have a Zoom with all of you. And thank you for visiting this lecture and to show interest in Partimento culture and its legacy in the 19th century. So I would like to share my screen. I hope it will function. We'll see. Perhaps you can give me a sign if you could see something.
Looks great.
Oh, fine, it's great. Then I'll start. Well, it's about method of teaching, the method of teaching compositional and improvisational skills with the help of short basso continuo exercises, which was widespread at Italian conservatories of the late 18th century, can be into the 19th century, even in German or French music education. My lecture today gives a basic introduction to the use of partimenti and shows examples of their continuation at the conservatory in Munich. And here you can see my 3 parts of my lecture. First one is the introduction, of course. Current musicological research, the influence of standardized sequences on tonal music is undisputed. Unlike the juxtaposition of the individual work on the one hand and theoretical drafts on the other, which are meant to be cross-stylistic and not bound to historical traditions or documentation, it is possible to establish a closer relationship to the work in its historical setting via progression models. Following Karl Dahlhaus, Hartmut Flath emphasizes already in 2005 that the substantial importance of progression models for the history of composition has been neglected so far. In the music theoretical discourse of recent years, the rediscovery of the theory of composition based on the principle of the basso continuo is one of the most important developments of a historically informed music theory. In this context, the study of the 19th century is still largely uncharted territory. A century that produced the great systematic drafts of music theory that still have an impact today, and at the same time was defined by profound upheavals in compositional and interpretative practice, but in which central music theoretical categories were often still understood differently several times over. The direct or indirect categories were often still understood differently. The direct or indirect reception of Jean-Philippe Rameau's theory in particular gave rise to new systematics that proved to be either reformulations of older theories, as in the writings of Simon Sechter, or innovative grand systems, as in Hugo Riemann, while at the same time the tradition of the basso continuo and contrapuntal combinatorics continued to operate. In turn, the discussion of the phenomenon partimento focuses on its meaning as a central method of music theoretical didactics. The term means the exposition of figured bass parts and a related model-based didactics of improvisation and composition. The tradition of partimento playing originated in the Neapolitan conservatories. The exercises of the partimento tradition dating from the early 17th century, which were used to train generations of musicians in music theory until into the 19th century, contain almost all progression models. Among the most important evidence of their appropriation are Mozart's studies for Thomas Edward, which contain a large number of the historical models without mentioning the names, just as terminological questions for this area are only partially accessible in the first place, or the robust school of Simon Sechter. Large parts of German language music theory can be derived from the partimento tradition to the same extent as the continuation of Italian music theory in the 19th century, primarily as can be seen in Luigi Cherubini's teaching method of 1847, but French texts based on Rameau, such as Henri Robert's Traité d'harmonie from 1862 or François Bazin's Cours d'harmonie théorie et pratique from 1875, also reveal the influence of this tradition. Whereas the 17th and 18th centuries in Italy, the term partimento was still simply the designation for a basso continuo part, figured or not, in the sense of an improvisational template for virtuoso solistic playing. The focus of the examination of the phenomenon is significance as a central method of music theoretical didactics. The tradition of partimento playing started at the Neapolitan conservatories. It lives on in Viennese music theory of the late 18th and 19th centuries, namely the practice collection of Mozart or Förster, but also in Paris. Partimento students learn the playing of figured and unfrequented basses with the help of a relatively standardized repertoire of exercises. Most partimento collections of Neapolitan provenance are divided into two parts. The first set is the regole, that is, places, intervals, scales, octave rule, cadence, and progression models at the center of the exercises. The second part consists of a collection of partimenti in mostly ascending degrees of difficulty, which trains the use of the regole. Here you can see the some partimento of Fedele Fenaroli from 1875. If you would like to see more of them, I consider to watch the Monuments of Partimenti. It's a very interesting webpage of Robert Gjerdingen with several collections of Partimenti samples, even from Fedele Fenaroli. The question of the Florentine Academy of 1878, whether for the introduction to harmony, the traditional Neapolitan system, that is the practical approach through the study of partimenti, or the German approach, which starts from theory, is more purposeful, points to the obviously different concepts that characterize the second half of the 19th century. Ludwig Holtmeier points out that it was not until the Kestenberg reform of 1925 that the partimenti tradition came to an end, with the demise of the practically oriented teacher seminars that, in contrast to the bourgeois-influenced music theory, cultivated this tradition within the framework of the simpler musician and music teacher training. In Germany, as in Italy, the partimenti tradition clearly lost influence with the beginning of the 19th century, with Hauptmann's system representations, as well as Sechter's and Richter's textbooks. The connection to the Neapolitan school were cut off for the main strands of German music theory at the turn of the century. Well, the young Rheinberger, Partimento in Munich, first part. Josef Gabriel Rheinberger was born in Vaduz in Liechtenstein in 1839. Was a greatness of European stature in the second half of the 19th century. Sought after as a composition teacher and esteemed as a composer, the professor at the Munich Conservatory and Bavarian court Kapellmeister was formative for several generations of musicians. Rheinberger's great musical talent was discovered and encouraged at an early age. At the age of 7, he became organist at the formerly St. Florence Chapel in Vaduz. Now it's the Cathedral of Vaduz. Music lessons in the nearby Feldkirch and studies in Munich paved the way for an unprecedented career as a teacher and composer in the second half of the 19th century. Rheinberger was one of the most influential teachers of composition in Europe in the second half of the 19th century. Over 600 students from the old and new worlds, as many as 60 from America, attended his lessons at the Munich Conservatory. Many of them later achieved world fame, such as Engelbert Humperdinck, Ermanno Wolf-Ferrari, Horatio Parker, or Rheinberger's last private pupil, Wilhelm Furtwängler. Perhaps you don't know Josef Rheinberger by heart. I would like to show you one of the most famous works of Rheinberger. It's a choral piece, Bleib bei uns, denn es will Abend werden. It's a quite short piece, written by a 16-year-old young student in Munich. It's called Opus 69 because it was printed quite late, but Rheinberger was 16 when he wrote it. Well, now you've got a sounding picture of Reinberger, the composer Reinberger. I will speak about the teacher and about the young student. Reappraisal of the content of the lessons that Reinberger taught in Munich from as early as 1859 can result in a fundamental insight into the didactic and artistic contexts of teaching at the Munich School of Music. However, the question of what elementary knowledge Reinberger's students were equipped with and what tools of the trade the graduates of his class received has so far remained virtually unanswered, since Reinberger left no textbook in the proper sense, and his teaching methods are known only from notes and reports by his students. Thus, exact transcripts of counterpoint, instrumentation, and variation teaching have survived from the hand of his prominent student Engelbert Humperdinck during his student years from 1877 to 1879. However, Reinberger's teaching diaries, in which he recorded all the tasks of his lessons on a daily basis, and which he kept from the beginning of the conservatory until 1890, contain an almost complete curriculum of his school. Reinberger's testimonies, the sources of his instruction, whether primary or secondary in nature, as much as his compositions, can, when viewed together, provide a compact picture of composing, but especially of music theoretical education in the second half of the 19th century. Reinberger's involvement with music history began very early, presumably while still at home and under the tutelage of the organist Sebastian Pöhli, who taught the young Reinberger to play the piano and even the organ from the fall of 1844. I had already composed a 3-part mass with organ, which was also sung at the service, Reinberger reported shortly before his death in a letter about his childhood. Only a few beginner compositions have survived, including smaller organ pieces and unsigned and unsaved church songs set for 4 voices. Sebastian Pöhli, who had been working as a sub-teacher in the neighboring village of Schaan since 1844, first gave the older Reinberger
I assume you all don't see or hear anything?
Nope, I think Birger froze.
Okay. And he said that is a possibility with his internet connection. And he said, if that happens, he will be right back. So let's just wait for a minute for him to resume. Let's see. So again, I mentioned this earlier, but after the lecture, you have a possibility of asking questions, and you can either at that point unmute and ask a question in person, or you can type those questions in the chat. And I hope he will be back soon. Sorry about the delay. I hope he will be able to connect again.
This happened to me many times when I had a lot of people attending a lecture and my old computer couldn't survive. It would crash. With the laptop, I didn't have a problem, but I don't know what computer Birger has. So,
well, he said the internet connection at his home was unstable. So he warned me beforehand that it might happen and that he will be back right away. Aha, here he is.
Sorry for leaving the building without saying goodbye, but we have several router problems here in Jugendheim, where I'm sitting now. I hope it will never come again. So I get back to my citation of this beautiful report of Mr. Pöli. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks. And I start again. Well, Pepe and I sat down together at the table in front of a sheet of music paper, and I began to explain to him the triad in its 3 positions. After this, its inversions, the 6th chord and 4th 6th chord. I made him work a lot in writing from then on, writing only a number on the indicated root notes, indicating the chord in question, which he then had to write over in complete chords with notes, but in such a way that the whole formed a kind of melody and satisfied the ear. When I was convinced that he had completely got rid of this, I explained the relationship of the tones and keys. To prove whether he understood me, quite a few written tasks followed again. A mistake that I corrected once never happened again the second time. I remember quite well how I once said to him, Pepe, now you can probably put together the whole friendship tone circle through all 24 keys yourself. He looked at me with his dear, all-pervading eyes and remained silent. The word I can't never crossed his lips, but I understood him well. He had not grasped the matter. I then said, look, my dear Pepe, if you start from the root C and drop a minor third first and then a major third and put the first chord into the major and the other in the minor over it, then you will get through all 24 keys. And finally, you will be back in C major. He looked at me and said nothing. So come to the piano. I will make the thing understandable to you. So now the root C, the perfect chord in the octave position. Now drop a minor third in the bass. Now you have the A minor chord in the 3rd position in your hand. Now drop a major third. Now you have the F major chord in the 5th position, and so on. Go ahead. You'll get it together by the time I come back. Just use the piano to help. When I came the next time, he had put together the whole friendship tone circle, only missing a few times the position. The mistakes were corrected and the task repeated, and when I came the next time, Pepe quickly came out with his task book and the friendship tone circle was done correctly. He did this every time he was quite sure that his task was correct. In the opposite case, I had to ask for it myself. When we had pretty much memorized what we had discussed above, we started with the 7th chord and its inversions. There were again tasks in abundance, all of which were accepted and worked out with the best will in the world. Well, the context of these lessons is significant because they follow the father's question to what extent his son was already ready to accompany his mass. Once, after the lesson was finished, the same father said to me, Dear Pöli, now we have lost our organist. Where will we get such a one? I thought about it for a while and told him, just have a little patience. Someone will probably be found. The reason for the examination of music theoretical basics in basso continuo teaching was thus also the need to train the young Rheinberger for organ service in the neighboring St. Florence Chapel. For Rheinberger, the examination of basso continuo exercises apparently already began in the context of his native lessons with Sebastian Pöli. At least a find in the parish archives of Vaduz supports this assumption. Rheinberger had to write the basso continuo to a mass in B flat major by Martin Vogt. The manuscript shows corrections by the hand of Pöli. Pöli himself reports in 1876 to Franziska Rheinberger about this mass composition. He wrote, "After the piano lesson, we sometimes went to the church in Vaduz, and Pepi played his chords, or a piece from the enclosed organ compositions by Martin Vogt. We also secretly rehearsed the great vocal mass of the same in front of his father. In Schaan, I had put together a mixed quartet and had rehearsed the same mass well. And on Josephi's feast, his father's name day, it was performed to his and God's glory with complete satisfaction in the church of Vaduz. It was at this mass that he whispered in my ear, 'Today we certainly got a calf.'" In fact, Rheinberger was able to accompany the service at the age of 7 and delivered his first compositions, as he recalled shortly before his death in a letter about his childhood. "I had already composed a 3-part mass with organ. The mass composition has not survived, only a few beginner compositions I told you about." Rheinberger's first teacher in Feldkirch from 1849 was the choir director Philipp Schmutzer, who also taught Rheinberger music theory. Of importance, however, was also, in addition to the young student's chamber music context with his landlord, the intensive encounter with the music of Johann Sebastian Bach through the retired Innsbruck teacher Nikolaus Moritz, who had met Mozart as a school preparant in Vienna. The encounter with musical tradition, and not least with Bach, is reflected in Rheinberger's first major composition attempts. The earliest surviving organ composition by Rheinberger's are 3 fuguettes, written by the 12-year-old between December 1st and 3, 1851, which can be found in his handwritten collection of organ pieces of various contents, which was only compiled in Munich. The collection is with great interest with regard to the compositional models of a boy. Among a total of 51 compositions, there are 31 from the 17th and 18th centuries, including 7 works by Bach, some of them arranged in a contemporary manner or fragmentary, while composers of the present or recent past, with Hesse, Köhler, and Mendelssohn, as well as Rheinberger's organ teacher, are rather underrepresented. At the end of this collection are these 3 fuguettes. The 3 very short compositions already prove Rheinberger's early inclination to inversion and narrowing of themes. And you can hear now the first of them, composed at the 1st December. Perhaps you heard it at the end. At the end of this fugue, the 12-year-old derives the first choral line of Vom Himmel hoch, da komm ich her, from that theme. When the 12-year-old Rheinberger in 1851 entered the Music Conservatory, the forerunner of the Royal School of Music, his lessons included 2 double lessons twice a week in each of his 2 compulsory subjects, piano and harmony with counterpoint. There was apparently no fixed curriculum yet. The students chose for themselves what they wanted to take. Shortly after joining the school, Rheinberger reported on the scope of his lessons in the capital. I have only 2 subjects of music, piano and harmony and counterpoint. In both subjects, capable masters are my teachers. Rheinberger meant Christian Wanner, who gave the piano lessons in the first year, and the later curator of the music department in the Bavarian State Library, Julius Joseph Meyer. The necrology of his teacher, written by Rheinberger himself in 1889, provides more detail. Meyer, a lawyer by training, studied theory with Moritz Hauptmann in Leipzig in 1848, became a teacher of counterpoint at the Conservatory in Munich, and then came to the State Library as conservator of the music department. The connection through Meyer offers Rheinberger throughout his life the opportunity to refer to Hauptmann and thus to the Leipzig Bach tradition. Meyer's lessons include a course in double counterpoint up to the 4-part double fugue in Rheinberger's second year of study, in which the young student acquires a surprising level of contrapuntal skill and certainty for his age. Rheinberger also receives compositional assistance from his new piano teacher Julius Emil Leonhardt, and not least from his longtime mentor Karl Franz Emil von Schafhäutl, whose influence on the young composer can hardly be foreseen, especially since he was able to persuade Rheinberger's father several times to continue financing his son's costly education. Third and last part, the adult Rheinberger, Partimento in Munich, second part, and I hope without disturbance from my router. In addition to his compositional activities, which were always in the foreground for Rheinberger, and his duties as director of the Oratorio Society and later as court conductor, as a Kapellmeister, he was very busy in the development of the Royal School of Music in Munich, which was refounded in 1867. At its predecessor, the conservatory, Rheinberger had taught since 1859, first as a piano teacher and later in the subjects of harmony and counterpoint. The first director of the Royal School of Music, Hans von Bülow, had definitively resigned from the directorship at the end of 1869 school year and proposed Rheinberger as artistic director. As semi-artistic director, Rheinberger now had a decisive share in the artistic direction of the music school. As of October 1st, 1874, this institute, which had previously been endowed from the cabinet treasury, it was subordinate to the court directorate, was taken over on state funds and transformed into a state institution. Rheinberger became royal professor in the state service with all rights and duties of this position, and as inspector had to exercise artistic control over the piano and music theory school. Rheinberger consistently gives 12 hours of theory lessons in the early years, and after an initial period of consolidation, has always had a stable enrollment of between 22 and 25 students since the 1890s. Rheinberger apparently teaches exclusively in small groups. His list in his book from the teaching years 1867 to 1871 shows a precise division for the first year of the Royal School of Music for the students of higher theory. Rheinberger thus teaches a total of 12 hours of higher theory. In this context, the first teaching diaries provide detailed information only about the first students of the newly founded music school of the 60s. The large number of students in the 70s, however, does not formally affect Rheinberger's teaching load, which remains the same over the years. Rheinberger's teaching duties, according to his appointment contract, with the Royal Court Music Directorate originally amounted to 14 semester hours per week, Reinberger had to teach 14 hours per week in the higher branches of musical theory, counterpoint, etc., and 3 hours per week in organ playing. The first theory class receives 4 hours of instruction per week. The second 2 hours, the finding is largely consistent with Reinberger's own statements about the instruction offered to him during his studies with Leonhard Meyer, among others. Reinberger's lessons in counterpoint can be reconstructed from the censorship books, 4 volumes, and this Lehrkurs des Kontrapunkts. It's a kind of counterpoint course from 1867-68. At the beginning of this course, Reinberger placed a recapitulation of harmony theory, which then served generally as a framework for all subsequent contrapuntal tasks. Reinberger placed the teaching of counterpoint at the center of his course. The Lehrkurs des Kontrapunkts, compiled for the 1867 school year, consisted of 5 parts: A, simple counterpoint; B, double counterpoint of the octave; C, choral arrangement with texts; then D, fugue and canon; and E, 5 and 6 part movements, double counterpoint of the 10th and duodecim. The related convolute of the Munich State Library, however, consists only of part A to C. Parts D and E are missing. Of great importance for the reconstruction of the teaching material, however, is another volume which I had the opportunity to arrange in the summer of 2012. Reinberger obviously falls back on this material contained in this booklet again and again. Of particular interest of this point is the collection of continuo exercises. In addition to a collection of figured and unfretted basses, these are available in Reinberger's music school diaries. The very premise that Reinberger conceived his exercises not as homework, but as reading exercises to be played at sight in class, places Reinberger's continuo exercises in the partimento tradition of the 18th and early 19th centuries. Reinberger's collection superficially lacks systematics, also because the source may be incomplete. But other specifics of the Neapolitan Partimento tradition are also missing, thus counterpoint, in the sense of specific understanding of the term directed more toward higher order voice leading, was also taught up to and including the Partimento fugue as the goal and summit of a course of instruction. But what means make Reinberger's exercise appear romantic, and thus the collection also representative for its time in the utilization of historical models for one's own work, and to what extent did the pedagogue Reinberger cleverly compile here a compilation of the exercises of this kind known to him and common at the time in the sense of the Partimento tradition. In fact, for those familiar with Baroque basso continuo practice, the chordal combinations of this exercise number 3 are hardly novel. Reinberger's intention is to deal with different doubling possibilities in 6 chord chains, as here in measure 9 to 13. The practice of working out simple movement models on the basis of continuo exercises, also haptically, is consistent with the tradition of exercises by Mozart for Edward, for example, or already by George Friedrich Handel. Classical here then means classical in the sense of the continuo age, in terms of sound and movement or cadential logic, not going beyond the framework of the sound and movement repertoire of the middle 18th century. The most striking feature for exercise 3 are those 6 chord chains that make up the actual content of the exercise. Similar finding can be noted in connection with other exercises. Elsewhere, Reinberger brings sequence models to the fore. The structure of the exercise is reminiscent of partimenti of Italian provenance. Other exercises by Rheinberger deal with the connection of ninth chords or sequence formation with seventh chords. The very premise that Rheinberger conceived his exercises not as homework, but as reading exercises to be played at sight in class, placed those exercises near to the tradition of the 18th century. Rheinberger's exercises, however, and this distinguishes his exercises from the early 19th century repertoire of Italian provenance, go beyond vocabulary of the Baroque in some places. For example, among many models that plays a role in his exercises, the composer also addresses the octave rule as early as in exercise number 4, or later in number 18. However, this appears integrated into a strongly modulating context. Elsewhere, an exercise indicates the possibility of chromatization. Exercise number 21 consists exclusively of scale movements. In any case, the question of why Rheinberger's exercises sound romantic can be less about choral details than about contextualization. This alone is the reason why in Rheinberger's work the basis of a romantic harmony actually emerges despite a very restrained figuring. It is about the tonal organization of choral connections. A direct comparison of the harmonics in Rheinberger's exercises with his compositions reveals clear similarities. In all areas of compositional creation, Rheinberger's harmony can never be described as excessively modern in the sense of the new Germans around Peter Cornelius, or of a crisis of romantic harmony, as Ernst Kurz stated for the music of Richard Wagner. The same is true of the collection of those continuo exercises that Rheinberger compiled for his students. The exercises hardly contain any turns that as phenomena go beyond Baroque or classical harmony. What is decisive here, as a principle in questions of the expansion of romantic harmony, is the contextualization of these phenomena. Rheinberger's examination of the basso continuo, of which the exercises are a testimony, is an important sign in the effort to link traditional movement patterns with common music-making practice before normative system of theory began to override the music theoretical training of musicians, especially of composers. The collection stands at the intersection of the question of craft and the science of art. Rheinberger's death in 1901 marked the end of an era at the Royal School of Music, which he shaped as a teaching personality to a special degree over decades. From the institution's first steps, Rheinberger was part of the committee after the closure of the formerly conservatory in 65, developed a concept for a new music school to be built in 1867 and directed it transitionally and together with Franz Bühlner, up to the nationalization of the school in 1874 and finally. However, Rheinberger's impact beyond his death should not be overestimated. While as a composer he disappeared into the second row behind outsized composer personalities such as Wagner or Brahms, and his work is being revived thanks to the efforts of many institutions, but also just laboriously, his work as a teacher is still present in the first half of the 20th century through his graduates as multipliers. For example, many of the teachers at the Munich Academy of Music were students of Rheinberger, including court conductor Josef Becht or court organist Ludwig Meyer as organ teachers, or Melchior Ernst Sachs, Viktor Glut, Ludwig Twille, or Anton Beer-Wallbrunn as teachers of counterpoint and composition, and the Rheinberger student Richard Trunk led the academy as president in the ages from 1934 to 1945. Rheinberger students also worked on other German universities and colleagues, often in influential and responsible positions, such as Philipp Wolfrum in Heidelberg, Adolf Sandberger in Munich, August Halm at the Freie Schulgemeinde Wickersdorf, Elias Oechsler in Erlangen, or Walter Pezet in Karlsruhe. And in addition, there are the pioneers of academic music education in the United States, including George Whitefield Chadwick or Horatio Parker, who in turn also sent their students to Rheinberger in Munich. The testimonies of Rheinberger, sources of his teaching, whether primary or secondary, as well as his compositions, when viewed together, can provide a compact picture of composing and especially of music theoretical education in the second half of the 19th century. Rheinberger's youthful works document the beginning of his development as a composer, especially for his own instrument, the organ. The systematization of contrapuntal and harmonic processes in the appropriation of the movement models and techniques originating from the 17th and 18th century cannot be separated from their historical places. This connection is the task and content of an historically informed music theory. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
I end my my screen sharing now.
All right. Thank you for this wonderful lecture. And we will open the floor to questions. So if you would like to pose a question, if you could raise the hand function, use the raise hand function, because that way it's sorted in the order in which you raise your hand, or you may type in a question into the chat if you wish. So I don't see one right now. So let me ask, you having looked through all of the partimenti, Rheinberger's partimenti, what do you think is the creative value of them?
It's not so easy to answer because you can have many hours by studying all those partimentos and playing very beautiful piano pieces, but they are not meant as creative outputs. They are only little exercises to train something. And it's something that you can find in compositions of Rheinberger or of his pupils again. So it's possible to read them as a composition exercise as much as a exercise to consider all those schemes and all those rules of playing continuo exercises. So the creative output is to have a basis for pupils playing continuo and to think about composition rules and exercises in the same way. Perhaps
Thank you. Thank you very much, David.
Hi, thank you so much for the lecture. Your response to Nico and a phrase you use prompts this question. You said something, to paraphrase, of the intersection between compositional craft and the science of art. I'm really interested in how these kind of that kind of messy connection between music as a craft versus music as art, because it seems to me there's some really kind of fundamental differences in how we view as a work, if we view it as art or if we view it as a craft. And how does his parliamentary practice bridge or exist on one side or the other of those?
It's a quite crucial question, and thanks a lot for it. Because it's one of the main problems even of the reception of Rheinberger as a teaching person and of a composer. I think it's the idea of Rheinberger too, that this, what he was teaching with partimenti and with contrapuntal exercises, is a kind of craftsmanship. And we know by reading those diaries of Rheinberger that he used his partimenti pieces to control the know-how of his pupils while he was teaching counterpoint. So there's the very smart and very strong link between harmony and counterpoint, but on a level that is craftsmanship, because it's not a artistic, even more a kind of sportive thing he's talking about. Concerning the lessons of Rheinberger, we know that he always looked at real scores. He analyzed Mozart and Haydn and some Beethoven and Weber with his pupils, and then he analyzed the works, the young works of his even young pupils, to have a look at their aesthetics. And this is more than craftsmanship. This is artistic, kind of artistic research he did with his pupils. But there is a division between craftsmanship, the basis for their artistic possibilities, and this what he found in pieces like the string quartets of Humperdinck, or the little choral pieces his pupil Horatio Parker wrote. Perhaps this is a kind of very interesting relationship. I told about the reception of Rheinberger and many of his pupils, and often people said, well, he was composing like he was teaching. And this is not the right way to consider this relationship, because, of course, you can find the craftsmanship of partimenti or the craftsmanship of counterpoint in his works, but I'm quite sure there is more than only this craftsmanship concerning his compositional aesthetics.
Thank you very much. Any other question?
Good evening. Thank you very much for this really interesting lecture. I would like to ask if you can focus, maybe because I don't understand at the beginning, who was the key man, if we can say this, for the reception of the Italian partimenti tradition in Vaduz, and do we know something about if Rheinberger practiced really Italian partimenti collections like Fenaroli, Durante, so on? Many thanks.
Yeah, it's a great pity that we do not know many facts about the pupil Sebastian Pöli, but it's highly interesting that he told with Rheinberger and with other pupils about partimenti or partimento ideas of this Neapolitan school. We do not know where he got it from. It's another thing in Vienna tradition where you can see how Italian thoughts are reaching the Austrian Empire. In Vaduz, it's quite difficult, and we even do not know what was Schmutzer teaching in Feldkirch with this bit older Rheinberger, who was 10 years old and who must have been taught counterpoint lessons at Schmutzer. But there are no information about things we could grab at Beethoven or at Mozart lessons. It's quite difficult to have an insight at people like Sebastian Pöli and Philipp Schmutzer, who nobody knows. So I'm quite sorry to not have an answer to this very interesting question, how the way runs from Italy to Sebastian Pöli. But it's quite sure that Neapolitan partimenti are very widespread in southern Germany, even in Munich or in Vienna or Salzburg in the early 19th century. And we can be quite sure that Pöli was taught some partimenti lectures in his early years, perhaps.
In the chat, we had a question whether Rheinberger's study material had ever been published, or if it remained manuscript, and if so, why or why not?
It remained manuscript until 2018 when I published it in one of my books on Rheinberger. But it's quite funny that all his pupils did not had any interest in this material because they're always teaching. They were always teaching contrapuntal things, exercises on basso continuo, like even like Horatio Parker did. So it's quite interesting that nobody did this step to publish these materials. You can read it in my book now, and it's possible to have a look inside it by studying the sources you can find in the the Munich State Library, which are always online. It's quite easy to find them.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Maybe let me ask a closing question. You are a professor teaching today. How do you see the value of such exercises, whether Rheinberger's or similar, in today's world, in today's music world?
Nice question, because I like to teach Rheinberger's exercises in my own music theory lessons. They are quite short, quite easy, and quite easy to explain. And well, they are hung up because Rheinberger used them all through the years to 40 years of teaching. And I even like to use them too, even his contrapuntal exercises. So it's quite a great fun to teach with materials of Rheinberger.
All right. Thank you again for this wonderful lecture. Thank you for asking questions, some of the attendees. Is there any last minute comment or question? Thank you again. We will post the recording of this lecture online. If anybody wishes to have a link, just send me an email. So thank you again, Professor Petersen.
Yeah, thank you for your interest and for your time, and sorry for the inconvenience of being interrupted. But so if you would like to watch it again on YouTube, you have a coffee break.
Thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful day, and see you at one of our next lectures. Bye, everybody. Should